everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of Racially Speaking, a podcast dedicated to having real and honest conversations about race as we view it through the lenses of faith, family, and vocation. This podcast was also created to be a place for people of color and our allies to safely have the conversations we're usually only having behind the scenes, and to invite anyone else to listen in, learn, and grow with us. I'm David, your host, and I'm excited that you are joining me today. Earlier this week, I had the chance to catch up with one of my very best friends, Zach Bush, and we had a great conversation. I've learned so much from both Zach and his wife Ashley throughout our relationship, and I'm glad you all get to listen in on our conversation. You would never know it, mostly because he'd never bring it up, so I'll tell you. Zach is kind of a big deal. Zach is a prestigious artist, especially in the world of 3D design, and his list of accolades is long. He holds both his Bachelor's of Art from Radford University and his Master's in 3D Design from Virginia Tech. He has also worked on posters for some prominent movies, such as Noah, and worked with the Office of the National Director of Intelligence. I could go on, but you get the idea. But before we get into the conversation, I want to give you a short disclaimer. Zach and I talk often about how navigating our racialized culture impacts our everyday lives, and this conversation was no different. Unfortunately, although we had planned to be a little more lighthearted in this first episode, at the time we had scheduled to record, it was just a couple of days after the tragic events took place at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Naturally, due to the purposes of this podcast, we postponed what we had planned and decided to share some of our honest thoughts on what took place and how we are processing the aftermath. We open up about some of our fears, frustrations, hope moving forward, and recommend some of our favorite resources. I also asked Zach about his recent move to Memphis, Tennessee, and why he and Ashley would decide to make such a change during a pandemic. Lastly, I apologize in advance, especially to you sound tech people, for some fuzzy audio throughout the episode. That can be attributed to some spotty internet and Zoom connection, as well as me being new to the whole editing thing. Anyway, I'm glad you all get to hear this, so without further ado, here is my conversation with Zach Bush. What's up, Zach? Welcome to the pod, man. Thanks for being the first guest.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So, it feels a little strange calling you a guest because you've been, really the main person I've processed with and workshopped with and really even practiced with as we've gotten this thing up and going. So I think I'll just refer to you maybe as podcast producer, Zach Bush. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you've been doing a lot of the work. I just it's been great, and that's cool. That's a great name.
Yeah, you could even consider putting that like on your resume or website, and I think you'd really find your niche, and you might actually finally establish some artistic credibility for yourself. Consider that, 3D
cool.
artist Zach Bush and podcast producer. That's your new thing.
Perfect.
Yeah. Anyway, man, I know the answers to a lot of these first questions because we talk pretty frequently, but for those that are listening who might not be as familiar with who you are, tell us a little bit about you, your family, and what you guys have been up to.
Yeah, me and my wife, Ashley, and our 3 kids and our dog, and our kids are all under age of 6 and below. We have, it's been a really, strange, exciting, frustrating year for us. A lot has happened. We've moved twice. Yeah, we just moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and we've been here for a couple of months. And it's been challenging because with COVID and everything being shut down, we haven't been able to truly explore and hang out with a lot of people from church. So it has been hard, and the schools are closed. So everything is virtual. So all our kids are home 24/7.
So to be clear, you don't recommend moving during a pandemic?
No, I do not. It is it's very hard. Well, we moved to a place that we didn't have any connections, friends. We had friends that knew people from here, but we didn't know them directly. So it has been hard because it was not like we kind of came in and just got plugged in right away. It was kind of like getting to know people and
Right.
having people get to know us. And so it's just been a slow process, but we're here.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, I was giving you a hard time about moving during a pandemic, but on the flip side, as I know, is a serious thing. You guys moved because you felt like you should, and you felt called specifically to Memphis, Tennessee. So can you, again, I know you've explained a lot of this to me in the whole process, but yeah, I think it's helpful to hear, to anybody listening, to hear why you guys decided not just to move there, but to move now, and kind of what that's been like.
Yeah. Well, we lived in Pennsylvania before this, and we were living there for about 2.5 years. And we were having a hard time trying to find a church that we can really get plugged into. And so, long story short, we had a really hard time with that. And we constantly asked God, like, where do we go? What do we do with this? And then COVID hit and we were quarantined. And so we decided to sell our house because we found out that my dad had cancer, and it was one of the most aggressive forms. And so we actually, after we sold the house, we moved in and bought a camper, lived on their property for the summer. And then he had his cancer removed, came back. He's cancer free right now. So we were like, where do we go? Yeah. So that was exciting to hear, but I ended up teleworking for the job that I had. And since I was able to telework full time, we were like, okay, where do you want us to go, God? And first we had our sights set on Atlanta because we have some really, really good friends down there that are in leadership at a church called Renovation. And they were like, yeah, we'd love for you to come down. So we thought we were doing that. And we did not get a place down there through just the house. Yeah, the housing market is crazy. So from there, we knew churches over in Memphis, and our friends in Atlanta kind of were like, oh yeah, we have people that came from that area. So we got in contact with a church over here. Didn't really know anybody, but it was like, hey, we got to make a decision because in Pennsylvania, the winters are getting cold and we want to get out of this RV. So we decided to take the leap and bring our whole family down here and just kind of set up shop here. And and there's a lot involved with like deciding factors and stuff, but I don't want to ramble too long and
ramble
that's
away.
Like the gist of it. Yeah.
I wanted to ask a little more about, like you mentioned, the process and the things that you guys were considering as you guys at first were wanting to move from Pennsylvania to Atlanta, and now you're in Memphis. And I think the main thing you guys were considering as you were making the moves or not making the moves was church, as you mentioned, and you mentioned having difficulty getting plugged in. So can you talk about, I mean, everyone that's listening, you guys know somewhat what to expect from what we're talking about on here, but Zach, can you talk about specifically what you guys are thinking about for your family as far as, representation, proximity to other people of color, and just what that looked like as you guys felt called away from Pennsylvania and to somewhere, but now it's Memphis.
Yeah. Well, first, we never have been to a church of more than one or two Black people. It's always been a predominantly white church. And that has always been like uneasy for us. We'd like to have more diversity in church that we do go to. And so the church that we found down here was Fellowship Memphis. And even on their website, they talk about being a multi-ethnic church. They have people of color on their leadership, which is a first that for us to see. And
it's huge.
They have people on their worship team. The pastors here, and on every other team, which is really cool to see. And that's what we that's kind of like our heart, is to be a part of a mixture of all different types of races, and when they incorporate that into the church through worship, through preaching, through outreach, and caring about the community as well, not just like, come to our church, we're going to help you out here, but it's like, how can we better the community? We liked kind of like their overall statements of like, they are a multi-ethnic church, but they also want to help the community and be a part of the church. They want you to be a part of something that's going to better the environment of Memphis.
That's awesome. So, I mean, you guys mentioned, or you mentioned, it's been obviously, and everyone understands this, but difficult to meet people and get plugged in the midst of a pandemic. The neighborhood you live in, maybe that we could unpack that a little bit, because I know you've talked to me about what that's meant to you and for your family. So you live in a predominantly, sorry, I can't talk, Black neighborhood now for the first time. And I'm assuming, I mean, do people in the neighborhood go to the church? I couldn't remember if you said that or not.
Not specifically in our neighborhood.
Either way, I thought that might be a better maybe example like that you've experienced so far of like being in a more diverse area, but specifically a predominantly Black area for the first time as a Black man. You know, in your life, you shared that with me before. Like, what has that felt like now that you've gotten there? And that's a big part of why you moved.
Yeah, we've always usually been a predominantly white neighborhood. And so coming to Memphis and being here, it's been really great to see how welcoming and warm people are in specific this neighborhood with our neighbors here. Moved in, everybody came up and introduced their family, said if you need anything, brought us gifts. So that was just really, really cool to see. When we first came in, nobody knew us.
Yeah. So, I mean, beyond, that's awesome. Beyond the friendliness of the neighborhood and your neighbors, like how's it felt, having Black neighbors everywhere versus you being the only Black person in a white neighborhood, I guess, if that makes sense. I'm putting you on the spot.
No, it does. No, yeah. I feel more comfortable here than I have in a lot of other places because I come in and I'm not looked at just by and judged by the color of my skin. It's like, hey, these people that live here in my neighborhood look like me, which it's kind of like a breath of fresh air to be like, wow, these are people who are just gonna see me for me and not like, okay, that's a Black guy in our neighborhood. But it's like, hey, yeah, another human being, and we're welcoming them in with arms open, and which is really, I don't know, it's just a really great thing.
Yeah, man. So thanks for sharing all that. So, I mean, I don't know if you agree, but 2 words stick out to me when you're even describing your reason for moving to Memphis, and it's proximity and representation. And to me, we've been in a lot of discussions with each other, with our friends, in discussion groups about church and race and family, stuff like that. And I think those are 2 words that, for better or worse, come up all the time. Here's how we do better. Especially to our white friends, we say, proximity, you got to get closer proximity to people that don't look like you. You need to care more about representation and be more aware of how unequally people of color are represented everywhere, really, everywhere from entertainment to leadership. And, the list goes on. Those are kind of the 2 big ones. So I remember you shared this with me, but, I'll be honest, when you said you guys are moving to Memphis and then told me what, the atmosphere was like. And you mentioned, how dangerous statistically it was, my instinct is pretty like, really, you want to do that? You want to move your young kids and wife to a place you've never been, you don't know anybody, and it's, super dangerous. But what stuck out to me, I think you did mention this, is wanting your kids to grow up not in a dangerous area for the sake of it, but you wanted to be part of this church, but you also wanted your kids to grow up in a different setting than you did, meaning a diverse setting around more people of color and people that looked like you, their dad, and not just surrounded by completely white settings like you are used to. I don't know, to me that was powerful because that kind of changed my perspective on why you or someone would do something like that. You talk about maybe how you and Ashley decided to prioritize your family with that as the backdrop, proximity to other people of color.
I think we as a couple, Ash and I, is almost like, okay, yeah, you see the statistics of a space, and yeah, your first instinct is to, yeah, it's like, oh, we want to avoid that at all costs. But after talking about it and praying about it, it's like, hey, God, you don't call us to make a comfortable life for yourself. I mean, you tell us to pick up your cross and follow you. It's not going to be like this really easy life. And so like, instead of, I mean, when people, these statistics of like infant, instead of writing something off and saying like, let's just avoid that because that's too dangerous, God put it on our hearts to be like, hey, I'm calling you to those areas. I want you to go into there. And just become friends with these people. Not just, I don't want you to go in and just witness, and then it's like, if nobody listens, just leave. It's like, oh, we want to be part of this community. We want to learn from the people here and become great friends with people in our community, and just grow with it and help try to.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
You've called us to. Yeah,
that's awesome. I'm both happy for you guys and admire you guys. / I'm still a little salty that despite my prayers to have you guys get back here to Radford, we're not answered, or at least we're not granted. But nevertheless, I'm happy for you guys, despite praying that those plans would fall apart. I probably wasn't supposed to tell you that, but I'm being honest.
No, you can be real like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a great transition. So proximity, which I mentioned, I think is really important. So I wanted to keep unpacking it, but I wanted to pivot a little bit. We didn't, when we sat down to record, or when we were planning to record originally, we didn't plan for this to be necessarily a heavy-hearted episode. And so far it has not been or anything, but I also thought it might be disingenuous and would not do this justice based on what we say we want to talk about on here. I wanted to address what happened a few days ago at the Capitol with the insurrection that happened in the Capitol building, and that everyone is aware of now and kind of processing. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit, and I don't really know where to go with it, but when you mentioned proximity, that kind of stuck out to me a little bit, because I think it's so much more than about physically just moving somewhere. I know that, as you said, you guys literally did that. Sometimes that is what it takes, but a lot of it is things you think about, people you're close to, as far as who you're in contact with and things you're aware of or let yourself see. There's a lot of layers to it. And I think what's happening now in the country and what happened even a few days ago alone says a lot as far as proximity goes. So I wanted to take, a little bit of time and be real with each other, and for those of you listening, to just check in and see share with each other how we're doing. And I want it to be helpful to anybody listening. Yeah, that's an easy thing to jump right into, right, Zach? So yeah, how are you doing? And then I don't know, what do you think would be helpful for people listening to hear moving forward?
Yeah, man. Wednesday was shocking, but at the same time, but it was a slow burn that day of frustration, anger. With not just that day, but I mean, he's been doing tendency before that. It's just kind of like, if you're not loyal to him, he hates you, he's you off, especially to minorities. And that's what really upsetting, is that all the things that he's said, he's done, that has hurt minorities in the country and just in the world. And people have been voicing this since day one and talking about all the terrible things he's said and done. But now, since it's kind of like nation and world news, and it's on camera, everybody sees it, and it affects them. I think that's the biggest thing, which is upset, is like, oh, now since it's hurt like politicians, I mean, they stormed the Capitol, and politicians got scared, feared for their lives, and now they're angry. And so like people are breaking ties. They want to punish for this. But it's like, this isn't a surprise that he's done this. I mean, he's been doing this kind of stuff since day one of presidency. And so when people were like, oh yeah, this is completely wrong, I'm frustrated now, he shouldn't have this. But it's like, if you're a minority, you've seen what he said and seen what he's done to have people of color. And so it's like, look, I'm glad that something's taken place now as far as like, what should we do about this? Because he's done something wrong. But it's just frustrating that it took the rating of the Capitol for people to think like, hey, he is dangerous. He has said some really terrible things. He is leading a mob of people that really hate, or a lot of them that do hate minorities. And so, yeah, it just sucks that it took that for it to be like, wow, he is bad. He is crazy.
Yeah.
And we should
get I think now. Yeah. I think you cut out a couple of times. So everyone listening, sorry about a little bit of lag, but you know by now, but Zach was talking about our current president, President Trump, and then he mentioned anger and frustration from Wednesday into now. And I think the rest was queer. But yeah, I mean, the word, kind of talking about is proximity, which you might not see how that really relates, but I think it relates because you mentioned this feeling, and I agree. And I share the anger, frustration, and I go to, just to be honest, a really cynical place really quickly. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not out of that place. And I find myself not knowing what to do with it. And I think it's wrapped up in this too little, too late mentality. And, as we've been referring a lot, if you're listening and maybe you're not, you don't identify with Christianity or aren't part of a church, that's fine. Our goal is that this is something that, anybody can listen to and engage with, although Christianity is the backdrop to much of what we're talking about. But being in a cynical, judgmental place is not something that is super, quote unquote Christian. It's not a place that I enjoy being in. And so I've been processing that in a nutshell, that's how I've been doing. But I say proximity because, like you said, a lot of these, I watched a lot of the news and heard a lot of the Trump supporting senators finally, and I say finally because that's how it feels, finally concede and say, hey, the election is over. We've got to stop this. And what they mean by this is we finally crossed the line. That's how it felt. And the finally crossing the line was the chaos at the Capitol, which, like everyone has seen now, was insane. But the proximity thing that's kind of representative of someone's front yard, right? Specifically the senators. Like you said, this wasn't surprising to many, many people. We've been saying this kind of stuff and have been fearful of this kind of thing happening for his entire term, especially this last year. And so it just feels too little, too late. And although there's some positivity, it's hard. I don't know if you agree, Zach, to not be in a cynical, unforgiving, unwilling to engage feeling, unless it's with somebody who is coming to apologize. And that's seems like a crappy thing to say. And I'm not saying it on strictly a personal level, like everyone who has disagreed with me over the last 4 years owes me a personal apology. Maybe I am in a couple examples, but that's another time. But no, seriously, like it just, the feeling there corporally maybe is, what did you think? Did you think everyone that was fearful of something like this happening was just being over dramatic? Did you think we were, I don't know, wanting to win some kind of mundane argument? I don't know. And I understand not knowing what you don't know. Like you don't know what you don't know. I do believe that. I believe everyone is in their own place and journey with figuring this stuff out if you're trying. But there's also, for me, a line of enabling, and it's tough. It's tough. I think back on conversation I had within the last even 6 months of saying, like, trying to explain these kind of fears, and to see it kind of culminate into what happened 2 days ago was for sure awful, disgusting, and terrible. But to see people express shock, and for that to be the tipping point of calling out something that is so terrible, felt frustrating in a way that I think a lot of people might not understand. And I think the frustration was too little too late, like I said, or we've been saying this was going to happen. Why are you surprised that supporters of President Trump would do something like this? Like, it's no longer surprising. Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, you're talking about proximity, and I mean, I was talking to some of my other friends who are Black and that live up in Pennsylvania. I mean, that was another thing where it was like, I mean, just being in a neighborhood predominantly Black people, just knowing like, okay, if there was like a message that came out and Trump was like, okay, all my supporters just go crazy. Just being in a neighborhood like this, I'm like, okay, at least I'm around people that look like me and you're not going to judge me. Cause like you see these clips and these videos and things that are caught on camera over the years of his presidency, how like when he's saying like, we should put up the wall, we should kick these people out, go back to your home and just saying racist stuff. But then you see his supporters out there who are like, hey, here's our leader saying this stuff, so I have the right to be racist and spew hate at these people. And I'm like, okay, if he were to do that, at least like in my neighborhood, I'm not going to get attacked like that. I may, if I go out further, but like these people that I live around me are not, I feel safer here. And with my friends in Pennsylvania, it's like, he's in a predominantly white space. He's like, man, I don't feel comfortable here because I know this is a predominantly pro-Trump space, and I want to leave because I don't know if it's going to get worse.
And I think that's important to even, I think that's important to even like elaborate on, because, the fear-based rhetoric that President Trump uses really every time he speaks, I think it's important to address, because I think that maybe until Wednesday, people weren't really taking that seriously. And it honestly, I'll be honest, like caused me to even doubt my own fear, like doubt myself, because I'm like, oh, am I not putting my faith in the right things? Am I being over dramatic? Am I being too political? All this kind of stuff. And this is almost kind of a sick thing to say, but it felt like when all that stuff was happening and people were becoming more aware on Wednesday, that it felt affirming, but it felt terrible because it's what I never would have wanted to happen. But in some ways, I didn't feel crazy, meaning I don't know if you felt this way, but I felt if, I've ever expressed not feeling safe living in a predominantly an area where there's predominantly Trump supporters, in that situation, literally not feeling safe, that seems crazy to a lot of people. And it seems crazy to me too. But I think that something like Wednesday shows that was valid, if that makes sense, at a terrible, terrible cost, an embarrassing cost for the country. People died, like awful, awful stuff. And I think I just look back and I wish that collectively people, imagine if people like us that were having those conversations were taken seriously, and it didn't take people infiltrating the Capitol building, again, someone's front yard, which, then like you said, senators are then like, oh, this is serious. This is dangerous. Now that I can see it, now that I want to see it. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, are you familiar with Esau McCauley?
No.
Anyway, he's kind of a big deal now. Funny story. He was actually my 10th grade history teacher back in the day. Anyway, he's a big deal now. He just put out his book, and I forget it now off the top of my head. Oh, I think Reading While Black. Anyway, I reposted something he posted earlier, but he just said, "You simply cannot say that you did not see something coming that thousands and thousands of Christians of color warned you about unless you instinctively discount our witness." And I mean, it sucks, but those words, I think, put words to a lot of how I was feeling and have been feeling lately, especially the word instinctively in there. So you simply cannot say that you did not see something that thousands and thousands of Christians of color warned you about unless you instinctively discount our witness. Instinctively, I think, is huge, because that's something that I think with all these conversations we're having, especially in 2020, 2021, your instincts are something you need to unpack. We all do, but that's what I think we're talking about when, we talk about various things. But I don't know, that quote stood out to me. Another one I came across, said, "Without repentance, reconciliation is manipulation." Meaning, like, I think a lot of people want to just move forward and say, okay, yeah, we all need to just come together and hear each other out. And it's like, well, that'll come after we have some repentance and some forgiveness and some apologies and reparations. And that's what people of color, especially the Black community, have been asking for forever.
It's just hard that they're changing because the capital got rioted. I mean, because we knew he was capable of this, because when he was debating Biden, and they asked him to condemn white supremacists, and stuff like that, and he didn't do it, and he said, "What? Stand down and stand by."
And that's where my cynicism comes in, because I saw people react to that and say, "See, he doesn't denounce white supremacy," and to me, I was already in a cynical place. I was like, why are we making a big deal out of this? This is like the 10th, thousandth time it feels like that he hasn't done that. Like, it's just like, what do you expect? I expected nothing less. That's just
when he says there's good people on both sides and things like that. But I'm like, when he says stand down, stand down, stand by, I'm like, he's commanding. Like, that's a command. And like, so when you see like the Proud Boys wearing shirts that say that kind of stuff, and he doesn't condemn those kind of groups, which are predominantly they're hate groups towards minorities. And then something like Wednesday happens. It's like, this isn't very surprising. I mean, he's been saying these crazy things and doing a lot of them, but it's not like at the national stage. I mean, sometimes it is, but it doesn't affect the politicians. It doesn't affect the Capitol. It's just kind of like they say, yeah, he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have said that. That was wrong. I don't think, but it's like now it's, like you were saying, at the front door at their home. And so now it's like, okay, now we really need to do something because that's crazy. And it's like, no, he's been crazy this whole time.
He's just in your front yard, which we mentioned is the Capitol building. He literally, his supporters had to do what they did for people to wake up so that they could. And again, I'm not saying, I don't think either of us are saying every Trump supporter is like them. That's absolutely not what we're saying. But
no,
you have to, at this point, acknowledge that he does and has encouraged that type of behavior the entire time. And that's what so many of us have been saying the whole time. I'm counting, Go ahead.
Yeah, when you bring up stuff like this, worldly like issues and struggles that we're going through, and you bring it up in a church environment, and they're like, "Oh, well, let's not talk about that. Let's just point to Jesus and talk about." Jesus
it surpasses politics now.
Yeah, and it's like, no, this is affecting a lot of our lives. We're living in the world. Like, you need to confront things when you see injustices, and a lot of people like to look the other way, and it's like, oh, it doesn't affect me. Or if it was happening to me or somebody in my church, then we would address it. And it's like, well, Jesus didn't do this. I mean, he went into the temple, he started flipping tables, and instead of just being like, oh, I'm going to go off and pray and hope that they stop. It's like, you do need to take some kind of action when you see an injustice happening, even if it's not to you. It's like, you still need to come around those people, just like where it says, like, a part of the body is hurting, like, you want to comfort it and take care of it. And it's like, the Black community, the minorities, they're hurting in our country, And I feel like a lot of times you don't get the comfort from churches or that are predominantly white. And it's like you don't get that care and love that you should be getting. And they should be fighting for you in a sense of like just standing up and saying, like calling it what it is when they see injustices. But I feel like a lot of times we're left to comfort ourselves and fend for ourselves together. And it's like, it's backwards.
Yes. I think this calling what it is thing, being explicit is really important for especially, people in leadership to do, but especially, like in something like we're a part of, like a church setting, is to be explicit about this kind of stuff. Like I said, I think this stuff kind of surpasses politics now, and it's just stuff that needs to be addressed head on. And I wanted to point out, in my opinion, and feel free to jump in here, the dangers of, what we call, gaslighting, but the danger specifically like in a church setting of just saying, well, let's just pray more, or let's just get back to Jesus, or get back to the gospel. I mean, two things for me is what that's saying is that's minimizing how the hurting, in this case, people of color feels. And then two, it's even kind of insulting, because then what that does is kind of calls into question someone's faith. I've struggled with that a lot. I'll have these thoughts that I'm sharing right now, and then I'm like, oh man, is my faith not strong enough? Or am I like,
should I be making a big deal? Yeah. Should I make a big deal about this? Like, am I blowing this up to be something that it's not? And you start to question it. And that's why I think it's important. And it's great to be around more people of color that understand when you say like, hey, I'm frustrated, I'm hurting. You don't have to kind of defend how you're feeling. But they're like, yeah, I understand the struggle. I've lived it my whole life as well. And then you can go
ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Sorry, the Zoom thing, man. Yeah. I want more people to understand, I guess what we're talking about with the dangers of not being explicit with what's going on. And I think it's one thing to not care at all. And that's a whole nother thing. I think, like, I see a lot of people comparing themselves to like the people that were part of what happened on Wednesday. It's like, well, okay, we're not that. It's like, that's fine. That's not hard. That's not bold to make yourself distinct from that group. I think what's bolder is to explicitly take a side. I think justice demands that you take a side. That's something Jamar Tisby, which I'll actually get to him when we give some resources out or recommendations out, but said, justice just in nature, especially those of you that are listening that are part of the church, like, justice demands taking a side. It's not a neutral, lukewarm thing. You take a side. And in this case, I think more people need to understand what that could look like.
If you feel like, oh, what do I do? Because I know a lot of my white friends, white people in general, it's like, well, I don't know where to start. And I think a good thing is just, start to listen, start to, like you were saying, go outside the Christian bookstore, just read authors of color, and listen to them, listen to the podcasts, and get not just a one-sided view of things. If you've been doing that, predominantly white men who are saying things, but just get a different perspective, and that will greatly help you start to see things just by listening, instead of being like, oh, I got to go out and I got to say this, I got to do this. It's like, no, just start to listen, soak up stuff, and maybe if you don't have any people of colors that are friends, reach out and be like, hey, I'm going to listen. I want to have interactions with people, and start to befriend people that are in my normal circles, and just start to broaden your horizon, ask questions to them if they're comfortable to talk to you. If not, just continue to read literature. If you want to watch stuff, you can go on YouTube. There's tons of resources out there that are like Interview with a Black Man with Emmanuel Acho. He does a great thing where he talks to his gather that are white, and he has a conversation about race and stuff, and it's really great.
But that's actually a great segue, because you've already done it, but I want to try and end every episode with giving some recommendations to everybody listening. But Yeah, for me, I'd say, man, check out Jamar Tisby. He's, I don't know if he's always on the podcast anymore. It's mostly, which I'll also refer to this guy, but Tyler Burns, the podcast, Pass the Mic. It's great. I don't even need to elaborate that much, but it's, they're founders of The Witness, which is a ministry centered around Black Christian. I think it's technically a Black Christian collective is the term. Anyway, I'm butchering it, but check out that podcast, Pass the Mic. They're great. And then Jamar Tisby also wrote the book, The Color of Compromise, which I read this past year, which is incredible. It's pretty much a textbook on the church and honestly, its complicity with racism. So it's super eye-opening, learned a ton. And he's also in the midst of releasing his second book. And I cannot remember the title. I think it's something like How to Fight Racism. Anyway, I highly recommend him and following him on, social media, Jamar Tisby. He's great. And Tyler Burns, who I think is actually the regular host of Pass the Mic. They're great. There's tons of stuff out there, but I recommend him. And I'll just leave everyone listening with that. Do you have any other recommendations, Zach?
Yeah, like a lot of recommendations on like books and authors and stuff. I like documentaries and stuff. The 13th on Netflix, and it kind of looks at how the country's historical history of like racial inequality within like the prison systems and stuff, or it drives the rate of incarceration in America, like predominantly African Americans. And Jamar Tisby is awesome. I follow him on Instagram, and then I also follow. I think you follow him too, Rich Lodas. Yeah. How do you say his last name?
I'm not sure. I was depending on you to help me out. I was like, is he gonna say it?
Yeah, Lodas. I really like his stuff because he just reposts his tweets from Twitter. It really makes you like. They're really great, like snippets of like, it makes you think. I really like following him. And Interview with a Black Man is a good one. And then also I just like the history, like learning about history of America. And there's a really good documentary called LA 92. It's a National Geographic talking about the riot, what happened in 1992 with Rodney King being beat and the lead up to that and like why the LA exploded the way it did from that. And like, it was really cool. But I'll just leave you with those.
I know it's hard to not keep going because even as you're saying that, I'm like, I could say like 15 more right now. But all right, we'll leave it at that for now, and we'll have to do another episode on like just recommendations. That'd be fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I guess fun is still appropriate, but this has been good, man. Thanks for doing this. And for those of you that are worried you're not going to hear more from Zach, don't worry, you are. Zach's going to be here more than he knows. That's news to you, Zach. But seriously, Zach's going to come back a bunch because we have a lot more to talk about. But thank you for listening. If you're listening to this, thank you for getting through this first episode with us. And thank you for bearing with us if you made it all the way to the end through our first little run through here. We promise to continue to improve. So thank you guys. And we'll see you guys next time. Well, again, I hope you all enjoyed that conversation and that it was helpful and challenging. Also, if you are wishing you could have heard even more from Zach, don't worry. Like I said, he will be back many more times. But before we go, I needed to give a couple quick shout-outs. First, a big thanks to Zach for helping me put this first episode together. Again, I couldn't have done it without him. And also, a big thanks to Ashley Bush, who is also Zach's wife, for creating our graphic that you see when you click on the podcast. Ashley is an amazing calligrapher and designer, and you can follow her on Instagram at @ash_bush, and you can and should also check out her website, ashbush.com. Lastly, a huge thank you to Dylan Dent, aka The Prism Person, for doing our music. Dylan is a singer-songwriter out of Roanoke, Virginia, and you can find him on social media as Dylan's Prism. That's Prism. All right, you guys, that's all I got. We'll see you next time, and thank you for listening.